They thought she was just a simple woman, nobody in a plain dress. When they invited her to play chess, it was not out of respect, it was to mock her. Laughter echoed through the room as they set the board, certain she would embarrass herself. But the moment she touched her first piece, everything changed. Her calm hands moved with precision. The smirks faded. Every move she made tightened an invisible noose around their king. By the time they realized the trap, it was too late. Checkmate. The room fell silent, and the woman they mocked walked away, leaving behind nothing but stunned faces. At a board frozen in defeat. But who was she really? And why had a true chess master been hiding in plain sight all along? Stay tuned. This is not just a game. This is a lesson they will never forget. Asterisk. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. A single light flickered above the chessboard, casting sharp shadows across the polished wooden table. The men around her laughed under their breath, their smirks wide, their voices laced with arrogance. She sat still, her hands folded in her lap, her simple cotton dress brushing lightly against the chair. The smell of strong coffee and stale cigar smoke filled the air, mingling with the tension that hung over the game. One of them leaned forward, tapping a black knight against the board. His grin sharp. "Your move," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. She lowered her gaze, her fingers lightly tracing the cool surface of the first white pawn. The board was a battlefield, neat and orderly, yet brimming with silent hostility. Wood felt cold beneath her fingertips, grounding her in a room where every pair of eyes watched her like a hawk. The laughter stopped as she slowly reached for her piece. Her hands were steady, her expression calm, but her eyes carried a quiet fire that none of them noticed at first. The pawn moved forward with a soft click, precise and deliberate. Something shifted in the air. The smirks faded, placed by puzzled glances. One man straightened his posture. Leaning closer to the board, studying her choice, another tapped his fingers on the arm of his chair. The sound. Sharp and impatient, she rested her hands back in her lap, her face unreadable, her breathing slow. The light above flickered again, making their expressions look distorted and uneasy. The man across from her made his move quickly, confident but slightly hesitant now. She studied the board again, her sharp eyes tracing every piece, every possible path. Her fingers glided over the polished pieces, choosing another move with quiet precision. The sound of the piece landing echoed louder this time. As though the room had fallen completely silent, a bead of sweat slid down the opponent's temple. He shifted in his seat, his confident grin faltering. Another man coughed nervously, glancing at his friend as if silently questioning his strategy. The board began to look different now. The pieces no longer just tools, but weapons lined in deadly formation. Her expression remained calm, but her presence was growing heavier with each move. The air felt thick, charged with something they had not expected. Their mockery faded into tense whispers as they exchanged quick, uneasy glances. She leaned forward, her next move quicker, sharper, as though she had been holding back until now. The click of the piece was crisp. Final, the man across from her froze. His hand hovered over the board, but did not move. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes locking on his. He swallowed hard, his confidence melting away under her steady gaze. The room was silent, except for the faint buzz of the ceiling light. Every man at the table now watched her with a mixture of disbelief and unease. Her next move was swifter. Cutting through his defenses like a blade through silk, he blinked, his mouth slightly open, his fingers trembling. As he reached for his next piece, she leaned back in her chair, her posture still relaxed. But her presence now dominating the entire table, the board was no longer theirs to control, it was hers. They just had not realized it yet. His fingers hesitated over the rook, his hand trembling slightly as though the piece itself burned to the touch. He finally moved, a desperate attempt to regain control. But his choice was sloppy, careless. She glanced at the board once, her lips curling into the faintest, almost imperceptible smile. Her hand moved gracefully. Lifting a bishop and placing it with a sharp, confident click, the man across from her stiffened, his eyes widening as he realized his king's safety was slipping away. The others leaned in closer now, their chairs scraping against the wooden floor. The sound harsh in the silence. A single bead of sweat rolled down his cheek, his jaw tightening as he tried to mask his unease. She remained still, her calmness cutting through the tension like a blade. One of the men cleared his throat, his voice low, muttering something about the move she had just made. Another leaned back, crossing his arms, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betraying a flicker of respect. The man playing against her stared at the board, his mind racing. Every move he thought of led him closer to disaster. Her fingers hovered over her next piece with quiet certainty. Like an artist preparing a final stroke, the sound of the piece landing was sharp, echoing in their ears, and it made him flinch. He reached for his queen, but his hands shook now. His confidence shattered. She studied him for a moment, her gaze calm, unwavering, like she had already seen the end. The board was no longer a game. It was a trap he had walked into. She moved her knight with precise calculation, her every movement smooth and deliberate. The knight landed in position, and suddenly, his king was cornered, his path shrinking with every glance. Gasps escaped from the men around the table, their amusement completely replaced by disbelief. His face flushed, his breathing heavier now, his composure breaking. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft, but clear. "Your move," she said, her tone devoid of mockery. Yet it struck him harder than any insult. He tried to think, but every second felt like an eternity, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. The man moved a pawn, a desperate attempt to stall. Her response was immediate, decisive. A rook slid into place, cutting off his last chance of escape. The room felt colder now, flickering light above, casting shadows that danced like ghosts around the board. Another bead of sweat dropped onto the table. Landing next to his trembling hand, she leaned back again, folding her hands in her lap, her expression as calm as it had been at the start. "Check," she whispered. The word was soft, yet it sent a jolt through every man in the room. They stared at her now with a mixture of shock and awe, their smirks completely gone. Her opponent swallowed hard, his fingers twitching as he moved his king to safety. But it was not safe. Not anymore. Her eyes followed his king's desperate shuffle, calm and unhurried. As if she had predicted it long before the game began, she reached for her queen, her slender fingers gliding over the piece with a deliberate grace that made every man in the room lean closer. The queen moved swiftly, landing with a firm, echoing click. The sound carried through the silence like a gunshot. His breath caught in his throat. As he realized how little space his king had left, she said nothing. Her silence was heavier than words, her stillness sharper than any taunt. The men around him exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier amusement completely replaced by quiet tension. One of them shifted in his chair, the legs squeaking against the wooden floor. Another drummed his fingers nervously on the table, his mockery long gone. Her opponent's face turned pale, his hands trembling as he scanned the board. Searching for an escape that was not there, she moved again, this time with lightning precision. Her rook sliding across the board like a blade. The king was trapped. His breathing quickened, his hands frozen over the board as though touching another. Peace might seal his fate. Every path he imagined led to disaster. The board was her battlefield now, and every piece obeyed her command. She leaned forward slightly, her calm voice cutting through the thick tension like glass breaking. "Check," she said again, softly, almost gently. But the word felt heavy, final, like a sentence passed. He moved his king once more, his motions stiff and unsure. The men standing behind him whispered, their voices low and filled with disbelief. She studied the board for a moment, her expression unchanging. And then her hand reached out. Her knight landed in perfect position with a soft click. Completing the trap with surgical precision, the men froze. His eyes widened, Her lips parted slightly, and she spoke just one word. Checkmate. The word was soft, but carried a weight that filled the entire room. The men stared at the board, stunned into silence. Their arrogance evaporated, replaced with a heavy realization of what had just happened. She leaned back in her chair, folding, her hands in her lap once again, as calm as she had been when the game began. Her opponent swallowed hard, unable to meet her eyes. The pieces on the board stood like monuments, a map of his defeat carefully carved by her steady hands. The laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone. Only silence remained. One man cleared his throat, the sound loud and awkward in the heavy silence. Another shifted his weight, his chair creaking beneath him, but no one spoke. Their smugness had drained from their faces, replaced by a stunned disbelief that clung to the room like a thick fog. The man who had mocked her most sat frozen, his hand still hovering near the king, as if refusing to accept that the game was over. His pride crumbled with every passing second. She did not gloat. She simply watched them, her calm gaze making them squirm in their seats. Her composure was steady, her posture dignified. Her simple dress a stark contrast to the intensity of her victory. The man finally pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. He stood slowly, his face flushed, his eyes darting between his friends. They avoided his gaze, none of them daring to speak. The woman reached forward and gently set her queen back in its starting place. The click of the piece against the board echoed through the room, sharp and deliberate. She rose from her chair, her movements graceful. Every step she took, making the men feel smaller in her presence. Her eyes passed over each of them. One by one, without a word, their laughter from earlier now felt like a memory they wished they could erase. The tension in the room was suffocating. Heavy with humiliation and unspoken respect, the man she defeated clenched his fists at his sides, his jaw tight, but he still could not look at her. She reached the door, her hand resting lightly on the knob, finally spoke. "Never mock what you do not understand," she said softly. Her voice was calm, yet it carried the weight of every move she had made. Not one man dared to respond. She opened the door and stepped out, her figure disappearing into the dimly lit hallway. The men remained seated, their heads lowered. The once lively room now haunted by silence and shame. The chessboard stood untouched, a quiet reminder of the lesson they had just learned. The door closed softly behind her, but the echo of her presence lingered in the room like a shadow. For a long moment, none of the men spoke. The overhead light buzzed faintly, flickering once more, casting sharp shadows across the board that had become their undoing. One man finally exhaled, the sound shaky, breaking the suffocating silence. She played like a master," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. Another rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes fixed on the chessboard, as if staring long enough might rewrite the outcome. "She is a master," a voice muttered from the corner, quiet but certain. All heads turned to the speaker, a man who had remained silent during the entire game, his expression grave. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes never leaving the door she had just exited. "You fools really have no idea who she is, do you?" he asked, his tone carrying a mix of irritation and awe. The man who had been defeated shifted uncomfortably, his pride cracking further under the weight of those words. "What do you mean?" he asked, though his voice lacked its earlier arrogance. The quiet man's lips curled into a faint smirk, though there was no amusement in his eyes. "She is not just some woman," he said. "She is a grandmaster." Gasps rippled around the table. A few men exchanged shocked glances, their disbelief palpable. "That is impossible," one muttered, shaking his head. Though the tremor in his voice betrayed him, the quiet man leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "She disappeared from tournaments years ago," he said calmly, "walked away at the peak of her career. Some said she vanished into a simple life, hiding her brilliance." His eyes moved to the chessboard, studying the devastating precision of her moves. "Now you know why." The man who lost swallowed hard, shame burning his face. His arrogance from earlier now felt childish, his laughter a memory that made his stomach churn. The silence thickened again, every man in the room replaying the game in their minds, haunted by how easily she dismantled them. Do not let her simplicity fool you, the quiet man added, his tone heavy. She is a predator on that board. And tonight she proved it. The defeated man clenched his fists, his pride shattered beyond repair. He stared at the chessboard as though it were mocking him. Never again. He muttered under his breath, but deep down, they all knew the truth. None of them would ever dare challenge her again. Outside, the hallway was dim, lined with faded portraits and the faint scent of polished wood. She walked slowly, her steps soft against the worn carpet, her posture calm and composed. Her hands rested lightly at her sides, her expression serene. Yet her mind was sharp, replaying every move of the game she had just won. A waiter carrying a silver tray stopped abruptly as she passed. Instinctively stepping aside, she offered him a polite nod, her quiet confidence making even strangers straighten their backs in respect. At the far end of the corridor, a heavy wooden door stood open, revealing a private lounge bathed in warm, golden light. A tall man sat alone inside, his sharp suit perfectly tailored, his posture regal yet relaxed. He glanced up from a book as she entered, his lips curving into a knowing smile. "You ended it quickly, did you not?" he asked, his voice smooth and calm. She stepped into the lounge, the soft hum of jazz music filling the air. "They mocked me," she said simply, her tone carrying no bitterness, only quiet amusement. He chuckled softly, closing his book and setting it aside. "They mock what they fear," he replied. She moved gracefully to a chair across from him, lowering herself with practiced elegance. "Fear will teach them more than I ever could," she said. The man poured her a glass of wine, the crystal glinting in the low light. "You are too merciful," he said with a smirk. "They do not deserve that mercy." She sipped the wine, her gaze calm and thoughtful. "Mercy is not for them," she murmured. "It is for me." He studied her for a moment, the golden light reflecting in his dark eyes. "You never told me why you left the game," he said quietly. Her fingers traced the rim of the glass, her expression distant. "Because I was tired of winning," she said softly. The words hung heavy in the air, their simplicity carrying the weight of countless victories and silent sacrifices. He leaned back in his chair, watching her with quiet admiration. "They still talk about you," he said. "They say you vanished like a ghost, leaving a trail of shattered egos behind." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps it is better that way," she replied. Silence settled between them, the kind of silence that felt warm rather than cold. A shared understanding of the life she had chosen, but deep inside she knew something had shifted tonight. The men in that room would not forget her, and whispers of her name would soon spread again. She finished her wine in silence, setting the glass gently on the polished table. The man across from her watched as she rose, her movements unhurried, every step deliberate. She walked to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain to reveal the city lights glowing against the dark sky. For a moment, she stood there quietly, her reflection faint in the glass, her eyes calm yet unreadable. The hum of distant traffic and the soft jazz in the background blended into a soothing melody. Wrapping the moment in stillness, he joined her by the window, his presence warm but silent, offering quiet companionship rather than words. "You could return," said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. She turned her head slightly, her gaze steady but gentle. "I have nothing left to prove," she replied. Her voice carried a serene finality, like a door closing softly behind her. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod, understanding that her decision was not rooted in fear but in strength. She stepped away from the window, her figure illuminated by the soft golden glow of the room. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet storm she had left behind in that chess hall, but she did not need their recognition. Her power was in her silence, her brilliance hidden in plain sight, her legacy carried in whispers rather than applause. As she left the lounge and walked down the long, dim corridor, her footsteps echoed softly, steady and unshaken. Behind her, the chessboard in that other room still stood exactly as she left it. The pieces were frozen in place, silent monument to her unmatched skill and calm dominance. And though her name might never be spoken aloud by those men again, they would remember her forever, not as the simple woman they mocked, but as the unseen master who humbled them with nothing more than a single game. With a quiet breath, she stepped out into the cool night air, the world around her, calm, unaware, and perfectly at peace, and she smiled.